Okay, we lived after we were married we continued to live in Suitland, Maryland. I had a job at a place called Commerce Clearinghouse Incorporated, which was basically a legal editorial firm which provided abstracts from the U.S. tax court and other laws to law firms all over the United States. I was what you call an editorial trainee. It was my first job after Wesleyan. And Susan taught in a little elementary school. I think it was Shadyside Elementary School in Suitland, Maryland, not too far from where we lived. Suitland was just about 3 miles right straight out Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., so we both had easy access to our jobs. I worked at the corner of 14th and Pennsylvania, and I actually could overlook the White House lawn and watch the president get in and out of his helicopter. Today that wouldn't be possible, but back then it was, it was a routine thing. So it got to be, you didn't even bother to look at it after a while. But then one day things started to get ugly. Remember, this is 1966. The country was just beginning to go to war in Vietnam. I was attending the George Washington University in Washington, going for a graduate degree in international relations. My thought was to join the Foreign Service. Susan was teaching, and things were really good, for the first few months we were married. And then one day, my boss at Commerce Clearinghouse called me in, and he said, "Tell me about your draft status." Well, I had what was called a 2S draft status at the time, which meant I was safe from being drafted as long as I was in school. Well, unfortunately, they changed the law. And so if you're in graduate school and you're not enrolled full-time, like I wasn't, your draft status became 1A. And when you're 1A, that meant that you were going into the Army or the Marine Corps or the Navy, and likely you were going to be shipped to Vietnam. So, and then he told me that he was on a draft board. His name was Lyman L. Long. I've never forgotten that as long as I live. And then about a week later, he dismissed me from Commerce Clearinghouse because of my draft status. Today, I could own Commerce Clearinghouse for that, but then it was perfectly legal. And so I was out of a job and facing the draft. Not a week later, my father called and said that the draft board in Poughkeepsie was very likely to order me to report for induction into the military service. So I had a big choice to make. There I was, 22 years old, freshly married, and I had a choice. So I tried to get into the Naval OCS, but my eyes precluded that because my vision was lousy. But the United States government said in its wisdom that you're okay to go into the regular Army. You can't be an officer, but you can be in the regular Army. So then I had another choice to make. It was either 4 years in like the Air Force, and in that case I probably wouldn't go to Vietnam, or I could just serve 2 years and get out of the service altogether. That would be 2 years as an enlisted person. So I made my decision, and I made it on a bus going into Washington one morning, where I had left home telling Susan that I was going to enlist in the U.S. Army. And when I got downtown, I walked into the Marine Corps recruiting station and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps for a period of 2 years. I thought for just a moment that my eyesight might keep me from going to Vietnam, but I learned later on as the story unfolds that that wasn't going to be the case. So I went home and told her. She got over her shock and amazement that I had enlisted in the Marine Corps. I told my father, who asked me if I was in a hurry to die, and he said, "Do you realize that the Marines are the first in? Do you realize that they are America's shock troops? Do you realize what you got yourself into?" And I says, "I do." I says, "I know that I'm going to go to Vietnam, whether I'm in the Army or in the Marine Corps." I said, "It doesn't matter. So I might as well go and get the best training that I can get. That makes sense to me." So we decided then and there that Susan would finish out the year in Suitland, Maryland, and I called the Martha's Vineyard Cooperative Dairy back, and we actually got our honeymoon on Martha's Vineyard for 3 months, which I don't think was a bad deal. It was certainly better than the first honeymoon, which occurred right the day we got married in Illinois. We flew to Boston, and then from Boston went down to Martha's Vineyard for a day, and I got back to Washington in time for Monday morning, which time I walked into the office and proceeded to fall over my desk. I just collapsed from exhaustion. I paid for that for years afterward. Think about it. Your honeymoon, and you come back and you collapse from exhaustion. It's not too good. So anyway, life progressed. We went to Martha's Vineyard, and at the end of the summer, we had a discussion about where she would go to live while I was in the service, and she decided that she would be near my parents. And so that put her in Poughkeepsie, New York, which was a very nice school system. She got a job teaching. I thought it would be good because if something happened to me, she'd be in a location near a large IBM plant with a fairly young location. And so it worked out all the way around. So with that in mind, we moved to Poughkeepsie. I spent my last 2 weeks with her. In fact, the night before I left, I took my .22 outside and shot a pheasant right out of the air, plucked it, and we had a pheasant and champagne dinner before I went to Paris Island the next morning. To be continued.